This is the Sunday Morning Breakfast Show with Sobia Iqbal on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good morning. You're listening to Sobia Stellar Sunday. If you're listening from the US, happy Independence Day. It's Sunday, the 4th of July. We have the best conversations coming your way. What is instructional coaching? Does it make an impact? And what is the Great British Teacher Rugby League? These are all questions we're going to be answering today. It's another thrilling morning. Prepare for takeoff.
Live from London, this is the Sunday Morning Breakfast Show with Sobia Iqbal on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
It's another jam-packed show, and today I'm very excited because I'm going to be starting a new course next week with the National College of Education for Instructional Coaching. I cannot wait. To help me understand it in more detail, I have the fabulous John Hutchinson as my first guest today. John Hutchinson is an assistant head at Reach Academy in Feltham. He has taught across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 and also tutors on the Ambition Institute's Masters in Expert Teaching. John has sat on expert panels for the DFE, Ofsted and the Standards and Testing Agency. He has a master's from Cambridge University and writes for the TES, Schools Week and other publications. John and his school at Reach Feltham are a beacon school for the teacher development with their methods of instructional coaching, which makes teachers and school leaders more effective. Both teachers and leaders challenge their system to make it more better, and they have produced absolutely fantastic results. That's quite an introduction. Hi, John. Welcome to Sobia Stellar Sunday. How are you?
Good morning. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday to you too. You had your little one on this morning. Is she okay now?
She's good. I was incredibly unsuccessful at getting any blueberry porridge into her. She completely resisted the whole thing.
Okay, that's brilliant. John, for those of our listeners who don't know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself? What was your journey leading up to now? What's your role and what do you do?
Sure. So I started teaching in 2013 and a few years I trained through the Teach First programme, and then after a couple of years teaching in North East London in Enfield, I moved to Reach Academy Feltham. I heard the founder, Ed Van Kerr, speak, who founded the school with Rebecca Kramer. They founded the school in 2012, so it was still quite new. Was just really inspired by the vision that they set out in terms of trying to have a transformative impact in a community that had been underserved historically. So I joined them in 2015 and taught through started off teaching in year 2 there and have taught across different year groups and eventually taking on a leadership role there. So it's an all-through school. We have children from 2 to 18 and we also have some 0 to 5 provision and post 16 and 18 provision. So we're trying to develop a cradle to career model that really tries to deepen impact in the whole community.
That's good because there's a variety of teaching and learning going on, because you've got Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, 4 and 5, and then you've also got post 16, which means that you get to see a lot of lessons across the board, which is fantastic.
Right, yeah, I was lucky that I was able to teach an A-level a few years ago as well, and we try and mix it up a little bit. So in our primary phases, we'll be lucky enough to be joined by our specialist secondary teachers. So our primary kids get specialist music and MFL teaching, and some of our primary teachers also have the opportunity to geek out a little bit more about their degree subjects and take some A-levels as well.
We've got loads of people coming into the studio. Morning, Woody. Morning to every single person that's come in this morning. John, so can you explain to the schools that aren't quite so up to date just yet, what is instructional coaching and what are the principles behind it?
Sure. So I think the first thing to say is that nobody has a monopoly on exactly what instructional coaching is. It's become a lot more popular recently, and you may well hear a few different sorts of recipes or a few different approaches. So let me set out how we understand it. We think that instructional coaching is an approach to teacher development, and it's an approach to teacher development that is predicated on weekly incremental growth. So what will happen is a senior leader usually, or the coach, will drop into a teacher's lesson for about 10 minutes. Following that, there'll be a coaching conversation, usually the same day, for about 20-30 minutes. And in that coaching conversation, the coach will zoom in on one very specific area for development. One particular gap they noticed in the practice, and they'll discuss how to close that gap, how to address that gap, and we call that the action step, the thing that will make the biggest difference, the biggest impact. But that needs to be really bite-sized. It needs to be achievable within a week. And then the coach and the coachee, crucially, will practice. There'll be an element of simulation where the teacher will practice whatever that action step is. And so the idea is that over the course of a year, you'll have 39 of these action steps. So even though they're very, very small developmental steps, together they sort of have a cumulative impact that we think helps teachers to get better and better and better as they're with us.
For those of you who don't know, John has written a chapter in the Research Ed Guide to Leadership as part of the Research Ed series. And I was reading your chapter, John, because I wanted to make sure I knew what I was talking about as well. It's referred to being very similar as sports coaching. And what you've said in that chapter is that it's individualized, intensive, sustained, content-specific, and definitely focused micro observations to make sure that the feedback loop in the classroom is closed. Can you just explain what you mean about context specific? What kind of things are we looking at? Is there anything in particular that you have given feedback to teachers that they need to improve on?
Yeah, so those 5 sorts of criteria set out, given by Matthew Kraft at Brown University, who conducted a large sort of meta review on instructional coaching approaches, and those are the 5 sort of criteria that you set out that he thinks these are the sort of key ingredients that you need. And one of them, as you mentioned, is that it should be context specific. And so what that means is, rather than giving quite general feedback, and as teachers we might have all had that. So for example, somebody comes in and they watch your lesson and they say, oh, I think that your differentiation could be better, or oh, I think that you know, the pace needs to change. There's sort of like stuff which you know, it's true. It's true that I probably could ensure differentiation is better, but it's so vague as to be unhelpful. And so Daisy Christodoulou recounts this story that Dylan William often tells of somebody going to watch a comedian and giving them the feedback that they need to be funnier. Which is like, it may be true, it's just not that helpful. What the comedian really needs is specific, sort of like a specific bite-sized step. So in terms of being context specific, what that means is we will take into account the class, the particular subject, and more than that, the particular aspect of that subject that's being taught. So we'll zone in on, for example, perhaps just a small explanation. So it might be that a year 9 history teacher was working through a worked example of how to open an essay really well, and so the coaching conversation will just sort of focus in on that and take into account the context of where are the class currently, what sort of children do you have in that class? Is it a relatively high attaining class or a low attaining class? What's their sort of knowledge already? And so that conversation will really ensure that it takes into account that context, because context matters. We can't just have very, very vague general conversations. We respect the context.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of makes sense, because Woody's just messaged in saying the same. It makes so much sense. In the past, everything was all thrown at the teacher. For me, I used to coach teachers. I've been doing drop-ins and lesson observations for a long time as well. And one of the things that I've found is sometimes it's really hard to give feedback to teachers in the subjects that you're not teaching yourself. And so I always found it unusual when leadership would come into our lessons and give us feedback when they didn't even understand the subject knowledge or the context or the things that were going on in the lesson. So I guess this is a much better way. It's low stakes, it's incremental improvement. And you've said in your book that it could be something like, for example, if the teacher needs to learn how to incorporate challenge into the classroom, you focus on that bit. If it's whole school routines not being followed, you focus on that bit for a week only. And you give them tiny action steps for improvement. So you give them a weekly time frame to make sure that they've made that improvement.
Yeah, and the context, of course, takes the teacher into account as well. It can be frustrating for teachers if, for example, they're doing a whole school CPD session, and that's focused on behaviour management and sort of ensuring that there aren't lots of disruptions in the class. And you could be a teacher who's very experienced and very skilled in behaviour management, and that CPD may feel like a bit of a waste of time for you, and probably is. And so coaching is allows you to take that context into account. So generally speaking, with coaching, when we're doing those drop-ins, there are sort of 3 levels, I guess. The first thing we'll be looking for is that sort of like classroom culture, behaviour management. If the class is not under control, then that really is what the action step is going to be about, because step 1 is making sure that all of the class is calm and purposeful and has a great culture. The next sort of like bucket that we'll be looking at would probably be instruction. So how good is the modeling? How clear are the explanations? If the behavior is all under control, then the teacher's probably got the headspace to focus on that. And if the modeling and the instruction are really strong as well, then we'll probably start to move to action steps and conversations about assessment. How is the teacher gathering really good, rich data about what the kids know and don't know within the lesson and responding to that? And so it allows you to, as you say, sort of respond to what that teacher needs in that particular moment.
And that's really interesting that you've said that about professional development, especially across whole school professional development and whole school improvement. You've written in your chapter, there's a standard for successful teacher development. Number 1 is professional development should have a focus on improving and evaluating pupil outcomes. Number 2, professional development should be underpinned by robust evidence and expertise. Number 3, professional development should include collaboration and expert challenge. Number 4, professional development programs should be sustained over time. And number 5, professional development must be prioritized by school leadership in order to move to mastery and expert teaching. I read this, John, and I thought it was fantastic, because very often I find that in some schools that I've either worked in, or I did a bit of supply teaching, or I walked into, the whole school improvement plan and professional development and CPD that's being given does not match the individual needs of teachers and how to progress forward and improve school improvement.
Yeah, so that CPD standard from David Weston's commission on CPD was a few years ago now, and I think it probably we do well to pay a bit more attention to it. But look, it's hard because as senior leaders, you have perhaps a dozen, 2 dozen, in some schools over 100 teachers, and you need to provide professional development for all of them, and also.
Yeah.
Professional development is one of those things which is sort of it's always important but never urgent. There's always going to be something on your to-do list, on your priority list, that feels more pressing than professional development, and so it can be easy to be the sort of last thing that you think about, and so that you can sort of like take a bit of a, I guess, a scattergun approach where we've got CPD on Wednesday. Crap, what should we talk about? And you sort of just do a random session on something. Having said that, like we do think that whole school CPD has a place. So there will be times that we'll need to train our whole staff on something. That could be, as you say, it could be something that the whole school is focused on. So recently, for example, a few years ago, we wanted to improve the amount and quality of reading in all lessons. So we thought that in all lessons, kids should be reading more, reading aloud in terms of whole class reading. And so we read the book Reading Reconsidered by Doug Lemov, and there are lots of great strategies in there for whole class reading, like control the game and accountable independent reading. And those are some of the strategies that we needed all of our staff to be comfortable with, and we needed them to sort of understand. And so we spent some time going through that. What we will tend to do is have quite sustained whole school CPD programs though. So we'll try to avoid we're doing differentiation in week 1, and then we're doing sort of entry routines in week 2, and then we're doing AFL in week 3, because I think it's unlikely that you're going to have impact when you're sort of hopping about like that. It's better to stick with one focus and sort of return to it week on week, giving teachers the chance to apply and embed and refine and adapt it for their class and their phase.
And that's great. And you've mentioned already why this coaching is different to other methods of coaching. What has been the impact of this type of coaching that you've seen in your school, that you think that, because obviously you've been praised as a beacon school. Can you just explain what impact it's had?
Yeah, so I mean, the school has achieved incredible results year on year, and I can I can say that because it's mostly our secondary staff who got some of the best GCSE results in the country, despite it being one of the most disadvantaged areas in the country, and so I think part of that is because our coaching is really focused on those kids' results. So whereas, as you said, in the CPD standard, one of the criteria recommendations is that CPD should be assessed against pupil outcomes, and very rarely is. The beauty of instructional coaching is, whilst you're doing that drop-in, you're seeing very, very clearly the impact that it's having on kids. You can speak to the children, you can look in their books, you can, within the lesson, see the impact that it's having. So we think it has a great impact on pupil outcomes, and that ultimately is what it's aimed at. But I think that there's something else, which is that there's a wonderful impact that it has on culture. When I first joined the school, I remember Ed, the executive principal, saying to me, "There are no superhero teachers here. Everybody's just trying to get better. You'll be coached every week, but so will I." From our NQTs right up to our head teacher, everybody gets coached every week, because we believe that every teacher can get better, and that it's their job to do that. But sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that's really fantastic, John, because often, because I've been in the profession 16, 17 years now. And sometimes when you become an experienced teacher, or even those who go into senior leadership, you sometimes become more relaxed, and you're not as adaptable to change as what you were when you first started. So the fact that your senior leadership team, including the head teacher, is involved in this process is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think that you're right, and we see it as like an entitlement, and not as something that's being done to teachers. But we say that, you should shout if you're not getting your instructional coaching, then you complain, because it's our responsibility to help you to get better. It's your right to be developed, and we think that helps with things like retention, and we think that we're delighted that this is becoming more popular now across other schools in the country, because we think that we have a retention problem with teachers in this country, where there's a horrific attrition rate within the first 5 years, especially. And part of that may be that, as you say, you make quite a steep developmental learning curve. And in the first few years, teachers really improve and develop, because they're getting lots of feedback, they're getting lots of support. And that tends to drop off after about year 2 or 3. And there's some research that indicates that that's about the same time that teachers begin to plateau. And that's only natural. All of us our performance will plateau unless we're really engaging in sort of a reflection, feedback, and practice to improve. And so, just as Roger Federer still has a coach, we don't believe that even if you've been teaching for 16, 17, 25 years, we don't believe you ever get to the point where you don't need to be coached anymore.
Yes.
And so we continue to ensure that teachers have that, and we think that, look, everybody likes getting better, don't they? Everybody likes feeling that they're getting better at something. So we think it has a good impact on culture in that respect.
Yeah, and it's good for motivation. I've had a few messages come in. So Chris has said this is definitely something that needs to come into education. Open-ended question of coaching is only relevant if they know that the person knows the answer and is drawing the answer out of them. Instructional coaching can be used in leadership coaching, and is something I will push on my website. It's also, we said it was similar to sports. So he said that he'll put it on his rugby league website as well. And Iram's messaged in saying, it's great advice. Do you have any recommendations on reading material on economy of language and coaching language? Her school has signed up with the Ambition Institute, but they're interested in wider reading material. So I guess the question is, what does a coaching session look like, and what kind of language do you use in that session?
Yeah, so great questions. So the books that I would recommend would be Leverage Leadership by Paul Bambrick Santoyo, Instructional Coaching by Jim Knight, or The Impact Cycle by Jim Knight, and then Tom Sherrington and Oliver Cavalieri's Teaching Walkthroughs. There are 2 volumes of that at the moment. I think that they're all really helpful companions. And I think that one thing that's interesting is that which we've already spoken about, is that there are different approaches to coaching, and we might sort of summarize those as the 2 ends of the spectrum would be more directive coaching and sort of non-directive or facilitative coaching. So directive coaching sort of assumes that the teacher doesn't really know what to do. They want to close the gap, but they don't really know what to do. And so the coach's job is to explain, perhaps model, and tell them what to do. Whereas less directive coaching tries to sort of draw the answers out of the teacher, assuming that they sort of already know the answer. I think good coaches are adaptive in terms of the approach that they take with a particular teacher. However, we tend to sort of use a more directive model, because we think that otherwise it can be quite frustrating. It can be, those conversations can end up being quite vague. For me, when I'm being coached, it's quite annoying if I know that my coach has an action step in mind. They know what I need to do better, and they're sort of trying to have me guess it. I'd rather they just said, look, at this point in the lesson, you just finished teaching, you just finished modeling a particular example, and then you told the kids to go straight into their independent practice, and it would have been really useful to do a quick check for understanding at that point. So the action step is, before moving to independent practice, do a check for understanding on mini whiteboards. If they know that, then I'd rather they just told me, and we can crack on with practicing and thinking about how I'll put it into my next lesson. So within a coaching, and that, so I guess sums up what a good coaching conversation, from my perspective, is. First of all, you go into coaching mode. So it is just a conversation, but it's a different conversation to when you're just chatting with your colleagues generally. So the coach will begin usually with some sort of like praise linking to the last week's action step. So if you met last week's action step, then you say, last week, I asked you to ensure that all pupils had a do now sheet on their desk when they arrived, to make sure that the start of the lesson was more settled, and you had that, and the start of the lesson was so calm. That's amazing. How was that for you? And that really closes the loop for the teacher, where you make it really visible, their development, you make it really visible to them, where they think, oh yeah, I have got better from last week, and somebody's noticed that. Great. Then you'll go into a sort of probing section. So really good coaches think as much about what they're not going to talk about as what they are. And so a phrase that I usually use in my coaching conversations is let's zone in on, or let's zoom in on. And that's really making clear to the teacher that there's loads of stuff that we saw in that lesson, but all we're going to talk about today is X. So let's zoom in on your questioning at the start of the lesson. And then we'll have, there'll be a series of probing questions. I'll have drafted those in advance, so I'll spend a few minutes preparing for the conversation. I'll just jot down a few questions. So I might ask questions like, what were you trying to achieve with that questioning? What was the purpose? What was the impact of that supposed to be? And the teacher might respond something like, I wanted to just check to see which children knew and which children didn't know. And then we can start to identify a gap, because if they wanted to check the understanding of the pupils and they only asked 3 kids questions and they just said, put hands up, well, did you know whether all of the children knew? No, I only knew whether those 3 kids knew. Great. So is there a way that we could find out that all of the children, what all the children knew or didn't know? I suppose that we could have them all write on mini whiteboards. And so co-constructing or directed by the coach will get towards that sort of action step, that thing that they could have done differently that will close the gap. And then once you've achieved that, that would be about half of the conversation. And once you've achieved that, you go into deliberate practice. This is the most important bit, and it's the bit that so many people miss out. And that's probably because it's a bit uncomfortable and a bit awkward. Nobody really likes doing that sort of like performance, but we just sort of embrace the awkward. So another phrase that I'll use is, let's get it on its feet. So after we finish the probing, then I'll say, great, let's get it on its feet. And that means literally we stand up. And if it's whatever it is that we've decided that the action step is going to be, so the example that I gave there is giving all children a question to complete on their mini whiteboards. I'll pretend to be the teacher, and the teacher pretends to be the child, and we really authentically, we don't say, well, what I would do is this. We pretend that we're actually doing it. So we say, okay, we've finished the modeling, so I've got an example on the board, everybody, that I'd like you to complete. I'm going to give you 1 minute to do it, and it needs to be independent, please. On your mini whiteboards, have a go at solving this problem for me. Go. And they practice it, and we'll practice it again and again and again. And we don't practice it until we get it right. We practice it until we can't get it wrong. We'll iterate and we'll keep going. So it's really automated, because teachers have so much to think about in lessons. It's probably the most complex task that a human can do, trying to teach 25, 30 kids something. And so teachers' brains are going to be so easily overloaded within a lesson that we want to automate as many of the sort of behaviors as we can, so that they can literally do it without thinking. Because if you can do it without thinking, then that buys you headspace, it buys you working memory capacity to focus on being adaptive and to focus on responding to your pupils' needs in the moment. So the practice will come, and then we'll just make a quick plan for exactly when they will put it in, so they can link it in a concrete way to a particular lesson or lessons that are coming up.
That all sounds fabulous, because I had Dr. Gabia Tolike in my very, very first show, which was like ages ago now. And she was saying a similar thing, because she's interested in neuroscience. And she was saying that it's really important to instill habits in teachers. And like you've just mentioned, it's really hard for teachers to think about things all the time. And by automating this process and changing their habits, it's much more effective. So in terms of being an expert, who would be considered an expert? Because sometimes, and this isn't aimed at senior leaders only, because anybody can help with school improvement. If you're not regularly practicing or improving your own craft, how is it possible for you to give feedback to another member of staff, especially when you're not an expert in their subject? Who's considered an expert?
Good question. First of all, we don't consider expert and novice distinction as a binary distinction. We think it's more helpful to think of it as a sort of spectrum, that all of us are on that journey to expertise. And we're informed by researchers like Kay Anders Ericsson, who you might remember wrote a book, Peak, which Malcolm Gladwell drew upon for his book Outliers. And that's where the sort of 10,000 hours rule came from, which was a bit of a misunderstanding. But anyway, Ericsson talks about some of the stuff that you need to develop expertise within any domain. And one thing that's really clear from the research is that expertise is highly domain specific, which means that you can become an expert in one small domain, so chess or teaching history, but that expertise doesn't transfer to other areas. So we need to respect the fact that it's domain specific, and it's informed by domain specific knowledge. So there's no way, one way that coaching can go wrong is to try and focus on a sort of tips and tricks approach, where you just sort of give like quite superficial sort of like teaching tips for people to do. It needs to go deeper than that. We need to be developing what we might call teachers' mental models at the same time, and helping them to improve their understanding of not just that, for example, retrieval practices is really helpful for pupils, but why is retrieval practice really helpful? So retrieval practice is informed by, for example, Robert and Elizabeth Bjork's new theory of disuse. And if you have an understanding of the new theory of disuse, then you're way more likely to be really effective in your implementation of retrieval practice in the classroom. In terms of expertise from the coach, I think that Peps McRae outlines sort of 4 subdomains that the coach should have relative expertise in. So first of all, as you say, there's the subject knowledge. So there's what he calls the path. So how to best sequence and present knowledge to pupils. That's going to be really key. Another subdomain, there are 4. So path is the first one in terms of sequencing the knowledge. The second is the pupils. So as we said before, context matters. So you need to know your kids really well. And we all know that, because when we've had to cover another class, we quickly realize that it's much, much more challenging than with the children that we know really well, because when we're covering that class, we don't know what makes those kids tick, what they know and what they don't know, how to motivate them, etc. Perhaps thinks that the third is that you have a good understanding of sort of the science of learning, so generally how people learn, and that includes things like cognitive load theory, for example. And then the fourth is self-regulation, so understanding yourself as a teacher, what motivates you, what your bad habits are, what your biases are. So great coaches should really have a good sort of sophisticated understanding of those 4 areas: the subject knowledge, the pupils, how pupils learn, and then the particular teacher that they're coaching and how to self-regulate. So we've tried a few approaches where we've had more people coaching, and we found that actually we moved away from that to have a smaller number of coaches that we were sure had greater expertise. I know that some other schools sort of have everybody coaching and try to sort of activate everybody as a coach. I guess, to get back to your question, that the danger of that is that you can sort of undermine the process if those coaches don't have that sort of requisite expertise underpinning the conversations.
And how do teachers feel about the process, and has it added to their workload? Have they been on board with it?
So really, really lucky at Reach. We have an incredibly open-minded, agile staff who are really, really committed to getting better. We really prioritize teacher development. We think that the teacher effect is so important. There's nothing more important than the kids having a great teacher in front of them. And so we sort of really prioritize that, and we think really hard about what we can take off teachers' plates so that they can do that. And so we don't do, and we haven't for years and years, we don't do some stuff that other schools might do. So we don't have any expectations of marking books outside of lessons, for example. We centralize detentions, for example. And we think really carefully about what it is that we're asking teachers to do. And if we don't think it will have as big an impact as, for example, instructional coaching, then we'll prioritize that. So teachers have to commit to a half-hour coaching conversation every week, and they have that in their calendars. And we ensure that time is protected for them so that they can focus on that. I think that it's probably also worth saying we're quite lucky in that we trained a lot of our own teachers. So a lot of our teachers came through our teacher training program, many of them whom started with us as TAs, and we've sort of developed through. So they're really comfortable with that process. Also, when we recruit teachers, we coach them during the recruitment process. So when I joined, I had to teach a 20-minute lesson. It was on, I think it was on improving sentences by using adverbial phrases, if I remember correctly. It was a while ago now. So I taught that lesson for 20 minutes with a year 3 class. And then after 20 minutes, the person that was observing me gave me an action step. So they gave me a mini coaching session. They said, I thought that was great. I think that when you gave them their independent task, there were 5 steps to that. And some of the kids were a little bit confused. They forgot them by the time they got to their place. So I think that what you should do is next time is, as you give those 5 steps, just jot them on the board so that the kids can refer back to them and tick them off in their head as they go through them. So you're going to teach the same lesson again, and could you do that, please? So I taught the same lesson again, and I jotted the steps on the board. And then in the interview, we're able to sort of say, right, so that's sort of instructional coaching. That's the approach that we take to teach development. And you're going to have one of those conversations every week. So if that's not for you, and it's not for everybody, if that's not for you, then this place probably isn't for you, because this is a place where we'll always help teachers to get better. And I loved it and thought, great, I can really see myself developing as a teacher here and getting better as a teacher as a result of this. But it means that if there are teachers who think, oh, that's horrible, I want to be left alone, actually, I don't want anybody coming in and telling me how to sort of like teach differently, then it's unlikely that they'll sort of apply and go through. So those are the ways that we try to ensure that everybody's on board.
And I think that's fascinating, because when I was reading your chapter, that's the one bit that I found really, really impressive, that you were choosing and selecting people who were coachable and who had capacity for improvement, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Have there been any situations or instances where instructional coaching may not be effective? And what happens if those teachers or members of staff don't improve the aspect they've been coached on? What happens afterwards?
Yeah, good question. So I think that there are a few ways that coaching can go, that coaching can go wrong. And it's, first of all, like it's not a silver bullet, and it's something that takes time, like really takes time. You'll see impact after months and years, and it has to really be ingrained in the culture. I think that there are a few reasons that a teacher might not be developing even with instructional coaching. Probably the most likely is that the action steps that they're receiving aren't appropriate. So either they're too big, they're unachievable within a week, or that the coaching relationship just sort of doesn't work. So the coaching, for one reason or another, that there just isn't that sort of synergy between the coach and the teacher, and that might not be anybody's fault. It just isn't, for one reason or another. It's just not that communication isn't quite there. So we'll be quite sort of flexible and open-minded to switching up coaching partnerships if something isn't working out, and that's certainly happened over the past, where I'll go to an SLT meeting and say, this just isn't quite working. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. And so somebody will say, well, look, let me take over coaching there of that person, and we'll see if that helps. So we'll be open-minded to that. We also sort of check the action step. So is that action step appropriate for that teacher at that time, or is it much too high level, or is it too vague? And so it could be that that's part of it. We also have in a kind of meta way, we have a coaching the coaches process, where Tilly, who's our primary head teacher and our sort of guru of coaching, she's the best coach that I've ever seen. She'll also watch me coaching, for example, watch me coaching one of my teachers, and then give me an action step on my coaching. To help me to become a better coach, she'll also then coach me on that. So various ways to try and sort of like quality assure and make sure that coaching is having the impact that we want it to.
Okay, that's really fascinating and interesting, because obviously being a coach comes with a lot of responsibility as well. Those of you who have just joined us, we're talking about instructional coaching. We're talking about the idea of dropping into lessons, having a coach, being given an action step, and then just actually doing it and making improvement within the space of a week. If anyone has got any questions for John, you can tweet us at TT Radio 2021 or at Sobia Stella S, hashtag TT Radio. I'm just going to give you a quick scenario, John. What if there's a school that doesn't allow coaches or leaders to drop into their lessons because of union issues and issues with making an impact on performance management?
So yeah, tough, right? I think that my advice with any school looking to adopt instructional coaching, regardless of whether there are potential union issues or director time or whatever, is that you should start small. I'm a little bit worried that because coaching has become like the new big thing, there are lots of schools who are really sort of like rushing to sort of like try and do this across the whole school. I had one teacher get in touch with me recently saying, can we're doing a course on it at the moment. They said, can we join the course? And I said, I'm sorry, we're fully booked at the moment. And they said, oh, that's a real shame, because we're rolling out instructional coaching across all of our secondary teachers next year from September. It's 150 teachers, and we're not sure like what instructional coaching is at the moment. And I messaged back saying, well, why are you rolling it out? If you don't know what it is, then what are you doing? Don't roll it out across all the staff.
Sorry, you're cracking up a bit there, John. Yeah, that was my next question. How can leaders embed this as normal CPD culture? Because obviously they can't roll it out to the whole school.
So similarly with the union directed issues, my advice would be start small. So I would basically start off as like a voluntary thing. So I would say, look, we've heard of this new thing. We think it's going to be really powerful and help teachers to improve. It's completely divorced from performance management, and ours is. It has no bearing on performance management whatsoever. In fact, the line manager doesn't even know what the action steps are. And so is anybody up for this? And try and get sort of 3 or 4 people that are quite keen and quite sort of like, they're gonna throw themselves into it. Begin with those, and then you can start to sort of waterfall it out. Then maybe those 4 teachers might become your next 4 coaches, because they'll have had a term or so really high quality coaching, and so they've got a good model, and you're not going to undermine it by it being a bit crap, because if you try and roll something out and it's just people aren't really sure what they're doing, you're going to really undermine it in the future. People aren't going to want to engage with it. So I'd start with that. And then in terms of unions and in terms of sort of directed time, if this is something that you really think that is going to make a difference in your school, then protect the time for it. Explain exactly what you're taking off teachers' plates so that they do have time for this. I think that would be the advice.
Okay, that's really good advice there. I just want to highlight and just make it very, very clear, not just to teaching staff, but also to senior leadership teams who are listening. It's unattached to performance management, because I have heard of leadership teams trying to link it to performance management. If they don't improve, then we're going to do this. And that is the really, really the worst possible way you can go. You can follow this through, because it will naturally get people's guards up and they won't want to take part. And like John said, that you do need to start small, and you do need to make sure that everybody has buy-in into this new process that you're going through. And there's an element of trust that needs to be developed between staff and the coaches and leadership, etc., to ensure that it's all working properly within schools.
I think that's exactly right. You really sort of kill this as soon as you increase any sort of as soon as you inject any jeopardy or sort of raise the stakes, because I think apart from anything, you're not likely to see authentic teaching, because if the teacher knows that this is, linked to their performance management, for example, then they'll start acting differently when you come into the classroom and treating it a bit more like a checklist or sort of like a whiz-bangy, unsustainable sort of like model. And so keeping it really low stakes is absolutely key. Look, like, it may be that you have like a couple of members of staff who are underperforming or failing to improve in the school, and there'll be ways that you do need to deal with that, of course. But I think that what you don't do is ruin the professional development approach for 95% of members of staff for the sake of those 5 members of staff, because if you attach this to accountability and stakes, then it ruins it for everybody, and it's not a useful developmental tool for anybody. And so I think you just need a different process for addressing sort of like really poor underperformance.
And you've been doing this for quite some time in your school, which is Reach Feltham Academy. How long did it take you to implement a really good coaching structure where you did start to see improvement across the whole school?
Yeah, so I think first of all, like, if you I wrote that chapter in the book actually a few years ago now. It took a little while to get published and stuff. And the model that we outline in the book is different to what we do now. Not massively, but it's different to what we do now. If you asked us 4 years ago, it would have been different still. So we're constantly adapting and iterating and improving to get the right model for us. Of course, still grounded in those 5 criteria set out by Matthew Kraft that we spoke about at the start. But we ensure that we are continuing to have the best model to help our teachers to get better. And so we think that when the school opened in 2012, I wasn't there, like the instructional coaching was having a big impact. And when I joined, I thought it was absolutely fantastic, but and definitely making a big difference. But what I think one of the things that's really helped to ensure it does continue to have impact is that we don't just say that we do it, we actually do it. We really sort of like ensure that it happens for every teacher every week, because I know of lots of schools who say that they do instructional coaching, and when you speak to them, they say, oh, do you know what, like that meeting is often sort of like postponed indefinitely, and if you miss 2 or 3 coaching meetings, it can be really, really hard to sort of get back. So if as a coach you say, oh, I'm sorry, I've got another meeting, I need to cancel our coaching meeting, which is easy to do. It's easy to, when you're incredibly busy, think this is not absolutely crucial, I could just skip this. If you do that a couple of times, it's really unlikely that it's going to have impact, because the teacher just sort of gives up on the process. It's not incremental anymore. It's not bite-sized. It's not achievable. They don't really feel like it's valued. So I think it's not so much I think it's the longevity. I think that it's sort of consistently for months and years investing in that process.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you have to have buy-in from staff, and it does take a long process, and you do have to be committed to it, because with any change management, you have to make sure that you do stick with it, and that everybody is on board. John, you've got you've done so many things. How did you get involved in research, Ed? I'm sure there's lots of people who are wanting to know that.
Good. Yeah, that's taking me back down memory lane. It was 2014. I went to my first Research Ed conference. So I think, like lots of people, I trained to teach, and I wasn't getting great professional development in my first school, and so I was just reading around a lot of sort of like education stuff, and started blogging actually as a way to reflect upon my own practice. And so I created a Twitter account to try and promote the blog. That was back in 2013, and really just opened my eyes to this world of sort of literature and thinking I didn't realize existed. So that's where I was first introduced to things like cognitive load theory, and read sort of Daisy Christodoulou's 7 Myths About Education, and realized that actually a lot of what I'd been told in my teacher training probably didn't stack up against what we know about how kids learn and what effective instruction is. And so started blogging about some of the stuff that I was doing in my primary school, in line with some of that sort of like research on, for example, cognitive load theory, direct instruction, and deliberate practice. And was lucky enough to be invited by Tom Bennett to sort of share a few of those things, and then just sort of continue to blog about stuff that I was doing in my classroom. So way back in sort of 2015, I had a first go at sort of crafting knowledge organisers and using those to support kids in year 2 with retrieval practice. And so that was something that we thought it would be helpful to also share across a Research Ed. And so spoke and visited at those conferences from sort of 2014 onwards, just sharing a bit of what I was doing and some of the research that underpinned it. It led to me then taking on a master's in educational research, which continued to sort of inform the work that we were doing in my school. And then I was lucky enough with Stuart Locke and I actually we were on the core group that wrote the early career framework, which is coming into force in September, which tries to ensure that all new inductees into the profession have a chance to encounter this research and think about how they'll put it into practice in their class. And part of what, whilst I was on that group for the DFE, we were there for almost 2 years, I think. I spoke a bit about the sort of approach to instructional coaching and teacher development that we took at my school, so Stuart asked me to write a chapter in the book about it, and so that's how that came about.
It's fascinating because obviously we learn from each other, and you've highlighted a very interesting point that sometimes when you're in certain schools, and this is the same everywhere, not just recently, but across the years since I've been teaching as well, there will always be some schools that are really good at professional development. There are some schools that aren't as good, but I have got the capacity to improve. Genevieve said she took part in coaching outside of school and she found it really powerful and it made her a lot more reflective. And when I came into the profession, I actually joined with the Institute of Education, and we were taught to be reflective practitioners. And when you are teaching in the classroom over a series of years, that does get lost, and so it's a good way of bringing that back, which is fantastic. Woody's messaged in, how do you match coach to teacher, and can teachers be coaches? I think you've mentioned that.
Yeah, so we'll try, like I said before, we'll try to be really sort of open-minded and responsive and agile in terms of switching up coaching partnerships if they're not working. So we'll make a best bet about who best coaches for a particular teacher, and that will be based on where we think that teacher is at the moment on their sort of development cycle, and if they need somebody. If, for example, one thing that they're finding challenging is behavior management, and sort of like ensuring that the classroom is calm and purposeful and scholarly and respectful, then we might match them with a coach who is particularly strong in that sort of domain, and also sort of like explaining to teachers the strategies that might support them with that. We'll also think about, like, coaches have to know a lot about education and about teaching, but they also need to have high levels of emotional intelligence, because you need to be able to relate to that teacher, make them feel at ease, motivate them to sort of address those different action steps. And so we'll try and choose coaches and match them to in terms of what that relationship is going to be best. As I mentioned before, I think that it's possible to have all teachers as coaches, but I think that the risk is that a teacher might not be might not yet have the expertise to give really high quality conversations, set out really clearly what and why needs to be different in the future, and that might start to undermine it. And so, if at all possible, our recommendation would be to have a smaller number of coaches who you're more confident are going to be giving much higher quality coaching conversations.
Great, thanks, John. Where can we see you headed next? What are your interests? What research will you be taking part in next?
So I've actually just switched job recently. So I'm now working at our Reach Foundation, and our foundation tries to sort of help to scale our work a little bit, or share our work a little bit. We've always been quite outward facing, but we're only one school, and so it was tough capacity to do that. So my new role means that I'm able to think more about that, and so we have a few different courses that we're offering out on instructional coaching and on relationships and on curriculum development, as well as developing that cradle to career model that I spoke about before, investing not just in the school, but in 0 to 5 and post 16 and 18 within the community.
And I'm not going to keep you for long because I can hear the little one in the background. Are you a football or a rugby man, John?
Football.
Football, no rugby?
So I wish that I was a rugby. My brother actually played for Harlequins Rugby League.
Oh, wow.
And so I wish that I was more into rugby. If you knew me, then you'd see that I'm much too scrawny for
that. And are you enjoying the football so far?
I am. Yeah, it's nice to be able to. It's nice to see England doing well.
For a change.
Yeah.
John, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you today. I'm definitely going to be keeping in touch and possibly irritating you. So I hope that's okay. Iram's messaged in saying, thank you for sharing your expertise. And I know there are lots of listeners who are listening out there who don't know much about instructional coaching, who are really, really glad that you've come on today. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us. And hopefully we can get you to come back on another show.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me, Sobia.
Brilliant. Take care, John.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, that was fantastic. Right, we're going to head over to the news. After the news, we've got Chris Bolton, who's also a school improvement director and a coach and mentor. But we're going to be actually talking to him about rugby. That's absolutely fine, Iram. Thank you for listening into the show. Next, the news.
Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TTRadio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful, and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. This is Teachers Talk Radio. This is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The UK faces an international student time bomb, according to a report in the newspaper. International students arriving from red list countries and who are due to start at UK universities in the coming autumn are likely, under current government rules, to have to quarantine for 10 days. They must stay in a government-approved hotel with a cost currently of around £1,750. The capacity in the system could well be stretched to its limit, although the Eye is reporting that many students may drop out or defer until 2022, when it's hoped issues surrounding the ongoing pandemic may actually be resolved. The Eye reports that, according to information from the National Indian Students' Union UK, around 55,000 Indian students are hoping to attend UK universities. But with India on the red list and this unlikely to change, reps from the NISU question whether there will be enough hotels. So far, some Scottish universities may be allowed to have students quarantine on campus, but this is only in the test phase and a pilot study is needed. There is no similar plan for England. Only 17 of 130 UK universities have so far offered to pay some of the costs for incoming students. Replacing isolation with unreliable COVID tests could put pupils at risk. Deepti Goradsani, clinical epidemiologist who's writing in The Guardian, is expressing concern over government proposals to change current advice for English secondary schools. Schools are currently facing very high rates of transmission, with 375,000 children in England missing lessons for COVID-19 related reasons. According to recent reports in the media, government ministers are looking to do away with the need for contacts of positive cases to isolate. The plan may be to instead use daily tests with results returning in 30 minutes. The Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency has made it clear that the tests were not approved for daily use due to the possibility of fake results. Arguments against the proposal to scrap bubbles include uncertainty around the long-term consequences of the virus in children, particularly concerns around reports of symptoms such as brain fog and difficulties with concentration and memory. Campaigners argue that mitigations such as face masks and air filtration should be introduced and vaccinations for adolescents begun. In related news, many media outlets in the UK are reporting that teens across the UK are faking positive COVID-19 tests in the hope of being sent home from school. Inspired by a number of videos uploaded to TikTok which show British teens mixing various liquids which then give a positive test, a dedicated account has more than 20,000 followers so far. Many education leaders have referred to the new trend as unhelpful, with Jeff Barton, General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders, commenting in the newspaper, "We are sure this involves a very small minority of pupils and that tests are usually used correctly. However, we urge parents to ensure tests are not being misused." TikTok has issued a statement of reassurance saying it removes misleading information that causes harm. This has been your weekend news.
Thanks for that, Joe. Right, we're going to move on to Chris now. Chris is a school improvement director. He's also a coach and mentor. He's actually on today talking about the Teacher Rugby League with us. Chris, hi, can you hear me?
Good morning, Sobia. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Brilliant. Chris, before we go over to the rugby, obviously you're a school improvement director and you've also been a coach and a mentor. Can you just give me your thoughts on instructional coaching and everything that John was talking about?
Yeah, it's really interesting to listen to John this morning, actually. So I have a side business doing coaching and mentoring, and I'm a director of school improvement, as you say, across 6 trusts in the multi-academy, across 6 schools in a multi-academy trust in the north of England. And there is a big difference between what people perceive as coaching and then what John was talking about as instructional coaching. Really, really interesting to hear that, because sometimes, you know, on the coaching courses I've been on, we are taught to, and I mentioned this in the message that I wrote, we are taught to draw out the information from the people that we are coaching. I sometimes find that very difficult, and I have been on courses where they really are against you providing advice, jumping straight into action. They want you to draw out from the individual. Sometimes they don't know that, and you don't know what you don't know. And so there is this, I guess, a bit of a difference between what people perceive as mentoring and then instructional coaching. So what I've been perceiving maybe over the years as mentoring, which is providing that information, it's actually been instructional coaching that John was talking about. And that's something that I'll be working on. For example, I've been working with a middle leader in the school in Blackpool, and we were talking about self-evaluation and how he's then going to move his faculty on, and we were talking about his leadership, and he had no idea what true self-evaluation looked like. He didn't know how that began, didn't know how to go about it. Did he involve the faculty? Did he not? And so, because I'd had that experience and I was that expert in sort of self-evaluation, because that's what I do across the trust, I provided him with that starting point, that, you know, I was instructing him that this is what you need to do. And then we built on that. And I've met him 3 or 4 times now over the last sort of 2.5 months. And he's really, really developed. And we've been talking about this self-evaluation over the time. And that is instructional coaching, I guess. It's what John was mentioning, the difference between directive and non-directive. And just to hear an expert on that, because I don't profess to be an expert on coaching. John is an expert on coaching. And I guess listening to him there, he's just validated what I've been thinking about now for the last 12 months. So I was really, really interested to listen to him, to be honest.
Okay, that's great. I'm really glad you found that useful as well. It sounds like you're actually doing quite a lot as well in terms of school improvement. However, we're not here to talk about school improvement with you today.
No.
And John is listening, so he's just said thank you very much. So it may be best if you get in contact if you want to talk about that in more detail with him. John, what is the Great British Teacher Rugby League?
So Teachers Rugby League it's a form of the amateur game of rugby, and I know that John mentioned his brother played for Harlequins Rugby League. It was a professional outfit, but so we have a very strong amateur program of rugby league, and I know that from previous messages, Sobia, you don't know much about what rugby is at all. So we've got the two codes, which is rugby union and rugby league. And so we have a system called BARLA, which is the British Amateur Rugby League Association. And the only representatives a number of years ago were from the amateur game. And the best of the best will be picked from the amateurs, and they will go on tours to Australia, to New Zealand, etc. Over the time, we have built from the amateurs a section or different sections of representative teams. So we have the Great Britain Police, we have the Prison Service, we have the Army, the Navy, and recently we've brought in the Teachers Rugby League Great Britain team, because a lot of us, including myself, I played rugby league as an amateur, and there are thousands of teachers who play the game up and down the country at the weekend, and they needed representing. So many years ago, about 20 years ago, I guess, the Teachers Rugby League was born. And we now have teachers who they come from Cornwall, they come from Newcastle, and they come to form the Great Britain Teachers Rugby League. They can be teaching assistants. We have heads of faculty. We have senior leaders, and that is in the men's and the women's game as well. We'll talk about the women's game a little bit later, but yeah, it's fantastic for them. It's something that they can come together, share their experiences, and it's a fantastic community that we've built, really.
And in terms of the gender makeup, is there equal? Are there more males than females? How's that working?
I think the game itself is more male orientated. However, we are seeing, I think, as in many sports, I think football is further ahead in terms of attempting to level up the gender. But we can see in many sports that the women's games are on the increase, and that's definitely the same in rugby league. Now, in rugby league, there is a big gender gap, and we can't get away from that. For example, we've just had the recent Challenge Cup Rugby League, which is our prestige competition in the professional game. So the men's game is held at Wembley, and then the women's final was held at a small ground in Leigh, which is near Wigan. So why shouldn't the women be held? Why shouldn't that final game be held at at Wembley as well? So I think rugby league is slower, and we are behind sports such as rugby union and football in that respect.
We've had a message come in saying that the Women's Rugby Union is the fastest growing global team sport.
Yeah.
And that's from BR Burrows. For those of us who don't know a lot of detail about rugby, because I've watched sport for years and I know what football is, but I don't know that much about rugby. Can you explain the rules of rugby and how it works? Basically, if you can.
Basically, if I can, it's you run as hard as you can and you hit somebody as hard as you can, I guess. It has been dubbed a violent sport, but it isn't a violent sport at all. It's controlled. It's a disciplined sport. To play rugby league at the elite level, it brings in an awful lot of discipline, self-control, self-confidence, being able to manage situations on the field, that leadership capacity it builds. And rugby league in itself it's a high impact contact sport, which you have to be extremely fit, extremely agile, think on your feet really quickly, but have a physical presence. And I know that John mentioned that he was too scrawny to play rugby league, but it isn't about that. It's about your heart. It's about how willing you are to take that field, no matter what size you are. We have people who play the game who are 5'2" up to 6'8". It has nothing to do with anything like that. It's getting stuck in. It's working with your team, and that's what rugby league is. You play for your friends and you play it hard, but it's with respect. It's a very respectful sport. On the field, it can be aggressive at times, but off the field, it's a gentleman's sport.
And John's just messaged in saying there's still time for his rugby debut. Chris, why is rugby considered an elite sport, and do many schools offer rugby as a sport?
It's an elite sport because of, I guess, the global and within this we are behind rugby union. Rugby union is a much bigger global sport than what rugby league is, and I very much admire the way that rugby union go about promoting their sport, and I think we are light years behind that. But it's a sport that is worldwide. Our World Cup in rugby league stretches from Tonga to Russia. We have teams in there from the Cook Islands, Lebanon, Italy have a team in there, Greece, the Czechs, the Germans. So it is a global sport. And for rugby league, we were very innovative in a lot of the things that now are in a lot of the sports. So, for example, the VAR that you see now in football, we started that in rugby league. That was, the video ref, and we were the first sport to introduce GPS tracking into our athletes to make them elite athletes, to look at the fitness, to constantly make our athletes the best that they could possibly be. And so we've set a lot of trends in the global world of sport. And for a small sport like rugby league, we're very proud of that, I guess. And what was the second? What was that about? What was the second question, Sobia?
The second question was, do many schools offer rugby as a sport?
Yeah, this is where we're slightly behind rugby union and football. Rugby league, unfortunately, is a very northern sport in rugby league. We do have leagues that are expanding. For example, we've got the Southwest Rugby League, which incorporates the Cornwall teams, and we have such teams down there as the Exeters and the Mansfield Marksmen and things like this. So we are trying to build it across the country. However, it is still a very northern sport, and in the northern areas such as the Lancashire, Greater Manchester, and Yorkshire, it's very, very strong. And in many of those areas, it's the premier sport in a lot of those. So if I take Wigan, for example, where I live, we have more amateur rugby league teams, and the schools offer a big rugby league program, and you probably won't find that in a lot of the other schools. Down south, it tends to be a lot of the rugby union schools. But yes, up here in the north, there's a load of teams. Schools are very, very much embedded in rugby league.
And obviously that would include in after-school clubs. Are there many that are doing after-school enrichment programs?
Yes, there's many schools offering after-school clubs the training, the fitness levels, attempts to get the fitness levels up. But a lot the thing is with the local schools in the north is that the amateur game is so strong. So when the students are leaving school, very often they'll go on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and they will go and train with their local clubs. But yes, a lot of the schools do offer after-school clubs, and there's a big league. There's a big school league, so you'll find that and this is a national competition as well. So the winners of the National Rugby League Schools Cup will play at Wembley. I think it's in May time, and the school rugby league is very strong. It has its own league, and it's that is embedded in history. A lot of the professional rugby league players that you see on both sides of the water in Australia and in Great Britain have come through that school system. They've been bred. It's bred into a lot of rugby league players in school, and they take that then on into the professional game.
Okay, that sounds good. Obviously, with anything, there are always people who are critics, and we've got academics who want to ban rugby in schools. Do you think offering rugby to young children is risky? And do you think rugby is being unfairly targeted by these academics?
This is where it kind of gets polarized, I guess. Should it be banned in schools? No. Excuse me. Do things need to change in schools? Yes. Players need to be protected, and in the professional game, there has been a lot of protection that has come in. So we have now the HIA test, which is head injury assessment. If a professional sportsman is injured on the field, there is a big difference, however, between the professional game and the amateur game. So at the amateur game, where I'm still involved in, so for example, we had a game yesterday. We had 2 head knocks. We brought ours off. The other team didn't bring their young lad off, and he continued to play. There are no regulations really at the amateur level, and that's where it needs to change. And that's our teachers as well. So our teachers are playing this game at the weekend, amateur, up and down the country for free, and they are getting knocked about, and they're not getting looked after really. And schools have to be really, really part of the answer to this. So in the professional game, as I said, you get a HIA, but they've also started to look at tackling techniques. Now, banning it in schools, I think if you're going to ban it in schools, you're going to have to ban the game, because ban it in schools, they're still going to play at the weekend, so that there are loads and loads of clubs up and down the country, and they're not going to stop. So stopping it in schools won't solve the issue. We need to start to look at training our 8, 9, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, the correct tackling techniques. Now, again, this is polarized within the game itself as to what is the correct tackling technique, but we've got to stay away from the head. You know, the rugby league we've just had one person in Australia. He's only 29, I think it is. And he was captain of Australia, and he's had to retire because he's so prone to concussions. And we've got to protect ourselves, but we've got to protect it at a younger age. We really have to embed it, and that is starting now. So we will see those people coming through into both the amateur game and the professional game in sort of 10 years' time. But that's going to be too late.
So what are the benefits of rugby? Let's talk about the good stuff about it. And why do you think it's better than football, if it's better than football?
It's better than football because if somebody goes down injured in rugby league, they tend to be injured. I don't know if anybody saw the Italian gentleman the other night who went down screaming in the box, and then when his team scored, he got up and run off. But so it's not any better. You know, we have. It's a totally different game, and I enjoy football. And I watched football last night, and you know, I love Liverpool, but rugby league is different. I think it just builds. We can talk about all sports building discipline and resilience in children, but I think all sports, you know, regardless of rugby league, football, rugby union, whatever, sport helps the mental state of children. And that's children in schools, that's children up and down the country, the weekends, every day of the week. You know, it releases those endorphins, and it builds that self-confidence, it builds character, it builds fitness, it's self-confidence. You know, the rugby league world, the football world, whatever team sport you're playing, it increases self-confidence because they're in that team environment. They have to work for each other. And I think that's what rugby league and those team sports build. It builds that togetherness and working for each other.
And what about you? Tell me, how did you get involved in the rugby league? And just tell me a bit more about yourself and what do you do? Like, how did you get involved in all of this?
So how I got involved in it was I played rugby league since I was a little one. Came through the ranks at school, etc. And I've always been involved in rugby league. Love rugby league. And when I was a teacher, I was still playing the game. And then again, we talk about being looked after. And I remember one day, dislocated my shoulder and having to go in the day after. You don't get time off work for anything. So I taught with one hand for 6 weeks. But the way I got involved in this Great Britain team was because I do some game analysis for a local club in Warrington, in the north of England. And the head coach there is a lad I used to play rugby league with. And so I went working with him. And then he got involved in the Great Britain teachers. So I went along to work with those. And that's how I got involved in the GB team. And I really enjoy working with the teachers. Really, really enjoy working with teachers because I feel part of that team. It's because Martin, the head coach, isn't a teacher, but I've got that community spirit with the lads, and so that's why I got involved in Great Britain Teachers Rugby League. But what I've got further involved in is the sort of trying to raise sponsorship, and that's where probably you've seen it on LinkedIn when I was looking for sponsorship, because we don't get any funding at all. So the teachers up and down the country, we have one member of our squad, and we trained in Warrington at the leisure centre attached to the university, and he came up from Cornwall, drove up that morning, hundreds and hundreds of miles, trained, and then drove back down to Cornwall, and he got nothing for it. And it's just a shame that these people want to represent teachers. So teachers up and down the country are willing to give their time for nothing. And we scratch around for kits, we scratch around for equipment to train with, and we are desperate to get some sponsorship to support the teachers of this nation.
And for those who are looking to sponsor this, what can they do to get in touch? How should they approach you?
So if they direct message me on LinkedIn, if they find Chris Bolton, KLJ Professional Coaching on LinkedIn, or at Chris Bolton 1975 on Twitter, and let me know in what capacity you can support us. That will be amazing.
Okay, Chris, thank you so much. I actually put out a question on Twitter, and so many teachers, and most of them were PE teachers actually, they told me that rugby was a brilliant sport to choose as a hobby, and that I should definitely go for it regardless of being a female and getting hurt, Chris. And getting hurt. So I'm going to think about it, and then we'll see what happens. We'll take it from there. Chris, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you today. Thank you so much to both you and John for coming on.
No, thank you for having us.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, guys, I'm going to finish slightly early today. That's it for today. Just a massive thank you to both John and Chris for being absolutely stellar today. You can find Chris on LinkedIn, and you can find John Hutchinson on Twitter if you'd like to find out more information about any of the topics that have been discussed today. Please do keep an eye out for my fellow co-hosts who are fantastic. They're putting out lots of content right now, and there's lots of questions going around which are really, really interesting topics, so really worth looking into that. Next up, we've got Graham, who's always got a fantastic show on a Sunday, and this evening we have our debut show from Hareen. It's been another stellar Sunday. You guys have been fantastic and awesome as usual. I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time. on Teachers Talk Radio.